Okay, good morning, everyone. Hope everybody's not too warm out there. I don't think you can be. It is Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. The Board of Supervisors of the County of Del Norte and the governing body of all other special assessment and taxing districts for which said board so acts is now meeting in regular session. Only those items that indicate a specific time will be heard at the assigned time. All other items may be taken out of sequence to accommodate the public and staff availability. And before we get started, I'd like to welcome our newest supervisor who was appointed by the governor for District 5, Susan Maston. Welcome. With that, we'll call this meeting to order. And Kylie, would you please take roll?
Supervisor Howard?
Present.
Supervisor Starkey?
Here.
Supervisor Short?
Here.
Supervisor Maston?
Present.
Chair Hemmingson?
Here. Okay, at this time, we'll take a moment of reflection. Thank you. Now, if you'll all stand and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Introduction of new employees. Neil, do we have any?
Yes, Chair, Supervisor, we have the Director of Building Parks and Maintenance here for introduction of a new employee.
Right on.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors. I am very happy to introduce you to, and I'm going to get this wrong, Rosendo Galeon Polanco. Rosendo came to us through the Workforce Center on the COVID cleaning crew. His high energy and positive attitude, he sold himself to us from the beginning. And as soon as we had a position open, we gave it to this nice young man. And yes, young man. And I'd like to welcome him officially.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to working with you guys.
Right on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any others? Neil? Okay, thanks. County Council, actions from closed session.
Yes, there's one. The board voted unanimously to accept a settlement offer in the case of Robert Plasvire, me, via FedEx Corporation. The county will get $250,000 from FedEx and $3,750 from Maxon Lift Corporation.
Thank you. At this time, I would ask for any corrections, deletions, or additions from board members to the agenda. In order to add an item to the agenda, the matter must have come to the attention of the county subsequent to the posting of the agenda, and the matter requires action before the next regular meeting of the Board of Supervisors. Are there any such items?
Chair,
Yes.
our CAO has requested an item, and the item verbiage is going to state, approve the change in per game wages paid to adult basketball league referees from $25 per game to $30 per game for a senior referee, a minimum of 2 years of applicable experience and or certified training, and $20 or $25 for a junior referee, depending on training and experience. And it's going to be requested by the CAO.
Okay. Can I get a motion to add that to the agenda?
Move to approve.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any public comment? Seeing no public comment, then we'll bring it back to the board. Would you pull the vote, please, Kylie?
Supervisor Short?
Yes.
Supervisor Maston?
Yes.
Supervisor Starkey?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson?
Yes. Okay, if we have nothing further on that, we're going to move to brief reports or announcements relative to county programs and projects, progress by 2x2 committees, goal committees, and other board and staff travel and training reports. And we're going to start with Supervisor Starkey.
Thank you, Chair. So I am, in the last 2 weeks, I've attended a special meeting for the local behavioral health board. We interviewed the 3 candidates for DHHS director. I attended the first of many 4th of July planning meetings for our 2022 4th of July. The themes are due April 15th, which is Friday. So think of your themes, red, right, and boom, let's go Del Norte, whatever it is. I've submitted 12. Hopefully one will get selected. The Grand Marshal is due, the applications for that is due April 25th. And now that's a really high honor. And so if you can think of someone, last year we had the public health nurses, they were our Grand Marshals. So if you can think of somebody that you'd like to be the Grand Marshal for our parade, that is due April 25th. And then my personal favorite is the Hometown Heroes. That is something that kind of was born out of the pandemic when we had no 4th of July to celebrate. We had Hometown Heroes. We select 12 people from the community, and we really would like a lot of nominations this year to choose from, and that is due May 27th. You'll hear lots of that from me. I attended the 41st Fair Board meeting. A constituent called and was concerned about some things that were going on over at the Fair Board, and so I attended for myself to witness some of their concerns. I attended a LAFCO meeting. The only thing that really kind of came out of that LAFCO meeting is that we were able to approve a public member selection, Lyle Armstrong, for the 2022-2023 year. I attended 2 special board meetings here related to the DHHS director position, and we were able to select someone, I think, but we haven't made that announcement yet. So that's your teaser for the day. That is coming soon. I had several meetings with Lieutenant Schneck discussing some of the staffing concerns and the workload issues that he has over there. There is an article in the Wild Rivers Outpost today that you can read all about directly from him about some of the staffing shortages and the concerns that he has. I attended a city-county joint meeting regarding TRLs, the tobacco retail licensing. And while we attended that with Supervisor Hemmingson, Short, and I for 3 hours, and there was actually no action that came from it, it still was an interesting discussion to go back and forth with our city colleagues to kind of determine where we're all at. I want to see more of that. I'd like to see the county and the city agreeing more and more, or disagreeing, so that we can kind of become one community. It's a lot of times we have things that are happen in the city, but they don't happen in the county. And I really would like to see that cohesiveness a little bit more. Following that, because I was a proponent of the TRLs, I was interviewed by the TUP, which is the Tobacco Use Prevention Program, with regard to some ways in which we can see less access to tobacco to our youth here in Del Norte County. I attended a meeting for the Area 1 Agency on Aging for services specific to Del Norte County. Now, we get our funding and we share that funding with Humboldt County, and a lot of times services don't make their way up here to Del Norte County. And a lot of that has to be with the fact that we don't have a worker here that oversees those programs. So we're really working with them to get a part-time employee up here so that we can get those opportunities for our seniors up here, which include transportation to medical appointments, fall prevention programs, installing bars and whatnot in their houses so that they can stay in their home longer and that sort of thing. I attended the First 5 Commission meeting. We're working currently on a strategic plan of what we'd like to see for First 5 in the next few years. Some of those ideas, of course, are focusing on oral hygiene that first 5 years, which is very important, as well as home visiting for new parents. And what that means is that we need to not only support the 0 to 5 reading and the learning, is that giving that support to the parents so that during the first 5 years of a child's life, they have that support at home as well. I attended Senator McGuire's town hall meeting regarding homelessness. And while the senator said that we had 17% of our current homeless population housed, I felt like that was kind of an inaccurate number. But I spoke with Daphne Lambert at Mission Possible, who said that he's basing that off a 218 point in time homeless count, and not really what is reflective of our homelessness here. We have probably, according to Daphne, somewhere between 500 to 800 homelessness in here in Del Norte County. So I also spoke with her about getting her homeless shelter, the emergency shelter, up and running, and what she could need possibly from the board to get that going. I began my ad hoc interviews for the exclusive operating agreement for Del Norte Ambulance. Supervisor Short and I had pretty much a marathon meeting sessions yesterday. I think we were on for 6-7 hours. And we'll be presenting the board with our findings in an upcoming meeting. I participated in an encampment cleanup on Pebble Beach Drive. It was a big undertaking for me, but it was very small scale in the scope of things. And I want to thank Code Enforcement, Building Maintenance, the Sheriff's Department, and Crescent City PD for collaborating together to get this encampment cleaned up. The gal that was living there had been there 4 years. And so with that came 4 years of garbage, and there was plastic slides, there was rugs, there was mattresses, there was shopping carts, all of that in the hillside of Pebble Beach, which is already eroding. So we spent the time, we took out 2,800 pounds of garbage from that area. The neighbors of the encampment were very grateful because with that brings in the traffic and other issues, environmental concerns. So one of my concerns right now and one of my focuses is going to be how can we operate within the law and still be humane in determining what to do with our homeless population. So that's something I'm going to be focused on the next couple months. I participated in a DHHS compensation analysis discussion. I was just really a fly on the wall for that one, didn't offer much, but it was interesting. I attended the College of the Redwoods Tolawa ceremony. It was a combined ceremony and a chamber mixer, and I will never pass up a mixer. So I was there for that. Rory Johnson, the Dean of Students over there, did a great job, and I do appreciate the invite. I met with Congressman Huffman to review the Pebble Beach embankment issues. And so that's what ties in with this embankment cleanup that we had. In 2016, there was a big storm that came in. It started really eroding those embankments. So CDD employees Rosanna Bauer and Director Heidi Kunstl, along with Engineer Ward Stover, did a real fabulous job explaining to the congressman our issues and our obstacles, which include, funding. And so he's going to help us look at some funding on the federal level, but also some of our permitting issues with Coastal Commission. So I am grateful that he took the time to come here and hear our concerns. I followed that up with a telephone call with Senator McGuire. We had a nice little Sunday morning chat and talked to him about the Coastal Commission and some of the obstacles. And he's willing when we are ready to set up that conversation so that we can move some of our permits forward. We also talked about a Caltrans cleanup and some issues with our Sheriff's Department. And then finally, and probably most importantly, I attended Supervisor Maston's swearing in ceremony, and I do want to personally welcome you to the board.
Thank you for that brief report. I'm going to go to Supervisor Maston. I know she has not been assigned any committees yet, but hopefully that will change after today's meeting. And maybe she can just, again, like to welcome her, and maybe she'd just like to give us a few words.
Yes, I just want to say I'm excited and looking forward to the opportunity of working with my esteemed colleagues here at the Board of Supervisors, but more importantly, I'm looking forward to hearing and working with the constituents in Del Norte County to help to identify issues and to find solutions to the issues we address here at the table. So I do have an issue, and I don't know where it's appropriate to bring it, but I was hoping that we could ask staff to do some research. I want to consider giving a portion of my salary for a specific budget line item, and I'm wondering if that's possible. And I didn't know where was the appropriate place to raise the issue, but I would like.
Yeah, probably not a board decision. That's probably a personal decision, and you probably take that up with HR, I would imagine. Start there.
I wasn't sure.
That's something we can look into. The salary is set by statute, so whether she can reject it or divert it is something that we can look at what the rules exactly are and come back at a future meeting if necessary.
Okay, I appreciate that. The other issue is I'm not sure whether I pulled the consent agenda item for the committee structure, because there was a committee I was interested in serving on, but it is not a committee. And so I want to know if we can create a committee And it has to do with public safety and law enforcement. I just feel that there's a crisis situation that we're facing at the jail for inhumane and also just liability issues, and taking a look at wraparound services and also just officer safety. And so I think that it's at the level that merits a committee to divert some serious attention to it.
Okay, we'll look into that. Maybe bring that back as another item on the agenda. We'll look into what the committees that we have. I'm not sure that we don't have something that fits in there, but we'll look into that and see what we're gonna have.
Okay, because I did look at it. So is it appropriate to pull the agenda item, or is it just appropriate to bring it up at the next meeting as an agenda item? I'm just asking for procedural.
Well, we can always add committees.
Okay.
You know, they're not, I mean, we can always change that. It's not something that's set, something that we can't change down the road. So we can amend that or add to it.
So then I will do that with the agenda item then.
You'll do what?
I'll pull the committee agenda item and then ask that be something that we consider adding as a committee.
Well, that's going to have to be a separate agenda item to bring it forward,
Okay,
that we add that particular, I'm thinking. Joel?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's pull it off consent to do a motion to table. Or are you thinking do the committee appointment list and come back with something else later?
I personally would like to do the committee appointments, and then if we want to add another committee or change something, then we can do that at another meeting.
so that's what I don't want to have wait too long. I'd like to have that on the next agenda. So I'm just asking procedurally, Mr. Chair, what the appropriate time to do that is?
Yeah, now's as good as any. You can ask me to put it on the agenda and I will look into putting it on
Okay.
the agenda.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like you to consider adding to the next board meeting agenda, the addition of a law enforcement public safety committee.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Supervisor Short.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended a Golden State Connect Authority meeting, among lots of other things. We talked about talking with Utopia Fiber, which they're talking about that middle mile, last mile connections for internet access for everybody in California. Talking to Utopia Fiber, and they're talking to them because they have much greater upload and download speeds at a much greater price for the consumer. So hopefully that will come to fruition in the near future. I attended a healthcare district board meeting. Also, as Supervisor Starkey said, I attended a LAFCO meeting where we appointed Lyle Armstrong and discussed the municipal service review and sphere of influence update for Hunter Valley, Klamath, and Redwood Valley community services districts. Also went to the city county workshop for tobacco retail licenses, as Supervisor Starkey stated. Also attended the DHHS director interviews and special meetings. In contact with Pelican Bay State Prison plant operations staff in regard to some possible improvements at the jail. They're very, very helpful out there. Hopefully we'll get some forward progress moving on some minor improvements to be made there. Attended a local behavioral health board meeting, discussed, among other things, the struggles of having the vacant positions in the behavioral health branch. Listened in on the city council meeting, attended the Del Norte Transportation Commission meeting. We discussed a request by the city to provide $400,000 of regional surface transportation program funds for improvements on Front Street. We opted not to do that. Through the guidance of Tamara Layton, we opted to spend $350,000 of RSTP funds, and she brought to light that we could use $50,000 of TDA pedestrian bicycle funding, which is a little more difficult to spend. So really wanted to express my appreciation for having the leadership there of Camera Layton in that regard. So we should be seeing those few blocks of Front Street being improved, which is long overdue. Yeah, Supervisor Starkey said we had multiple meetings with stakeholders, gathering information in regard to Delaware Ambulance and their exclusive operating area request. And I also attended the swearing in of Sue and wanted to welcome you myself. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Supervisor Short. Supervisor Howard.
Thank you, Chair Hemmingson. First, I wanted to kick off very long couple weeks, but with some forward progress on a town hall that I'm basically got a date set for April 28th, working with Commissioner Lara, State Insurance Commissioner, in helping to educate our community on the ever increasing rates of your homeowner's insurance for fire risk. As many of you know, this has been a huge concern of the boards and also a huge concern for folks in District 3 and also in District 5, where you butt up against the wild urban land interfaces. The insurance commissioner has been doing a stellar job in trying to put mechanisms in place that would prevent these massive increases in insurance rate costs to your homeowner's insurance. We're seeing rate increases in the neighborhood of 400%, or in some cases, your insurance completely being dropped, which doesn't do much for your mortgage if you have one. This town hall that we do have set up, we'll have Peter Mazza from the insurance commissioner's office attend with some suggestions that are going to help lower your risk factor ratings with the insurance companies that might help either reduce that rate from going so high that it forces you into the currently the California State's Fair Plan. So we're working on that right now, and it is currently set from 6 to 7 on April 28th. And I don't want it just to be for District 3. We will put it out there on social media and various other networks so folks can be informed on how to address these important issues that are not only facing Del Norte, but the rest of the state of California. As Supervisor Short mentioned, attended the interviews for the DHH director, and also attended with Chair Hemmingson, the meeting of the Natural Resources Goal Committee on the Salmon Stronghold Act. We're still batting around much of the language that's coming out of our federal side with Congressman Husband's reintroduction of the act in Congress and how that's transitioning through committee currently. So we'll be vigilant and see where that currently goes. Also had a meeting with Joel Campbell Blair and Tamara Layden on concerns associated with litigation with Highway 199 as the judge works towards a decision in that process. Also was invited to a city meeting where the California Endowment had funded the city with a community visioning plan based on economic development needs for our entire community, not just the city. So met with the consultants with Barry Consulting and various others from our community and envisioning what Del Norte County might look like here in a decade or two. And also working on several constituent issues off the end of Parkway, which actually is in my district. I wish it was in Sue's, but it's in mine, but issues along English Lane and also issues along Prince Drive. Also addressing some issues, continued issues with animal control on Fred Haight Drive. As you're aware, animal control did a stellar job in finally putting an enforcement effort on what was clearly an animal abuse case on Fred Haight Drive. Really working closely with Katie to make sure this goes through the entire process. So individuals that do have horses and cows like this individual work through our legal system and are prosecuted to where they can never abuse animals like this again. Also, Supervisor Hemmingson and I met with about 10 individuals from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. This has been their first visit to Del Norte County in almost probably 3 or 4 years as the collective management group for Region 1, which is our region that extends as far north as Mendocino or south as Mendocino County, as far south as Redding. And very happy to have them and Region 1 Director Tina Bartlett up here. Tina and I go back quite a ways, almost back to early 1997 when she first joined the department as a young biologist, helping timber companies with various plans in the area, but met with all her staff and expressed a great deal of need for their attention in our area. And I think we made terrific ground, Chair Hemmingson, on really cleaning up a lot of the blighted homes in the wildlife area. And I think we got a good track record on how we're going to get that addressed, maybe even before somebody enters office here this coming year. So going to work on that closely with Supervisor Hemmingson. Also paying a great deal of attention with community development associated with the governor's most recent executive order on drought. Some of you might be aware of the efforts that this board undertook with community development to really steer back the groundwater policies that were being forced upon our agency by the Department of Water Resources. We, through an actual information fact-finding exercise, were able to turn back a medium and high priority listing of the Smith River watershed to a low priority ranking, which in this case, when this executive order was issued, really helped us to avoid some of the executive order, especially as it relates to placing groundwater wells in the Smith River Basin. So that was good news, and it really reflects on the good work that this board does sometimes in really putting fact in front of fiction as it was coming out of the Department of Water Resources. Also discussing issues around a dog attack I just found out about on Fred Haight Drive that occurred last month. I was disappointed that I had to actually hear about it from a constituent before I had to hear about it from animal control. It's unfortunate that there's legislation actually in place that, in this case, that sent one of our constituents to an emergency room for some really extreme injuries that she's still suffering from to this date, besides just the trauma, but the healing from the bacterial infections that were given, that this dog wasn't put down. And that there's laws in place within the state of California that the animal essentially has to attack somebody twice in order to be put down. So it's an issue that I'd like us to take a look at with our Senator McGuire. And if this was a child, it would have been a different story, I think. And it's unfortunate that we have laws in place like this that we have to deal with at a later date. Still addressing lighting issues around the Salmon Harbor area and Smith River. Also addressing some constituent concerns and working with the Big Rock Community Services District on some property rights issues and vandalism that is taking place in that area. Also attended, as mentioned by previous members, of the Senator McGuire's Town Hall meeting on homelessness. And then sat on a panel that's getting kicked off to finally hire an economic development director through the University of California Cooperative Extension that will serve and reside here in Del Norte County, a long awaited and long overdue position. And I'm very happy that the board has participated in this process, that the University of California system and Glenda Hummison felt it was important enough to place a position like this in our community. And then attended our Border Coast Regional Airport meeting with Supervisor Hemmingson, where we discussed security needs at our airport. And that's the end of my report, Chair Hemmingson.
Thank you, Supervisor Howard. Appreciate that. I'd like to kick it off with one of the most enjoyable things that I did the last 2 weeks was I attended a piano recital that my granddaughter and grandson had both in. So that was probably the highlight of my last 2 weeks. As was mentioned before, had a city-county meeting trying to deal with the vaping, the flavored vaping products was the main concern. We didn't make too much headway there, but it was nice to have that meeting, even though somebody said it was only 3 hours, but my count was closer to 4 hours by the time I got home, from the time I left to the time I got back. As was mentioned before, DHS director interviews. We went through that process along with later on a Board of Supervisors special meeting that I attended. Had a Natural Resources Goal Committee that was mentioned by Supervisor Howard. I attended Brookings Harbor Commissioner meeting having to do with some fish waste treatment plant. So we're hoping to hear more information on that. I had a lunch meeting with Nick and Lisa Rail, who, if you don't know, has donated hundreds of instruments to the school district for kids to use, as well as supplied quite a little bit of the funding for the renovation of Crescent Elk Auditorium. It was a nice meeting, very casual, and I actually went to school with Nick. He and I were in gymnastics together, so I've known him for quite a while. As was mentioned, I had a local transportation commission meeting. I won't go into that because they've already been through that. Agenda review, attended the McGuire Town Hall on the homeless, had a meeting with Jeff Shester from Oceana. It's an environmental group. They're working closely with the whale working group that I'm involved with. He's specifically working on some ropeless gear innovations, and so he wanted to get some insight from me on that. As Supervisor Howard mentioned, we had a meeting with CDFW staff. It was a great meeting, very productive, I think, and we'll see some great outcomes from that. And Supervisor Howard also mentioned the Border Coast Regional Airport Border Coast Regional Airport Authority meeting. Also, and the security problems that we've had out there was the main discussion. And that is it for me. And so,
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
I did forget to mention that I am holding some town hall meetings. The first one being April 18th at the Lighthouse Community Church at 6:30 to 7:30. In Klamath at Margaret Keating School, May 3rd, 6:30 to 7:30. Crescent City Elk Middle School, May 5th, 6:30 to 7:30. And a virtual town hall on May 7th from 10 to 11 a.m.
okay, thank you. Okay, we have a 10:25 timed item. We're running a little bit behind. This is public comment period. Members of the public may address the board on matters which are within the jurisdiction of the board. If you are addressing the board regarding a matter listed on the agenda, you may be asked to hold your comments until the board takes up that matter. We will limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there any public comment?
Hello, my name is Crystal Berry.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, so in January, sheriff deputies warned the owners of a group of dogs who had consistently roamed Fort Dick, killing residents' pets to keep them contained or they would be removed. The animal control director asked me to encourage neighbors to file formal complaints in order to take this case to a hearing, and he promised to keep me posted on the process of the hearing. Since January, I attempted to contact the animal control director repeatedly to find out where things were in the hearing process. None of my calls or emails were returned. In March, I reached out to Valerie Starkey in an attempt to get some kind of response from the animal control director. Despite her efforts, I still received no response. During this time, the dogs were loose again, and they were recorded on security camera. The animal control officer was unavailable and the director was not in the office, so I called the sheriff's department, sent them the video of the dogs, and asked if they could go remove the dogs from the property as they had stated before. The deputy went out and spoke to the owner but did not remove the dogs. She said it was outside her jurisdiction and that animal calls are annoying when they should be focusing on people. I later spoke to the animal control officer, who was anxious to resolve the situation once and for all. She explained to me the director will not allow her to act on this case and that he wants to be the one to handle things. She shared my frustration that the dogs have not yet been removed and that the director was not responding to my multiple messages. I called animal control again and explained if I could not get a response from the director, I would begin to show up in person to speak to him. The next morning, my call was put through and it was clear from his reaction he was not expecting to talk to me. He said the paperwork for the hearing had been on his desk since January and he had not yet filed it. The director shared he'd been out frequently on medical leave and there's no one to do his work while he is gone. Despite having the video evidence of the dogs being loose again after the owners were cautioned to keep them contained, the director refused to remove the dogs from the property, even though he agreed there are several county and state laws that justify removing them. They are not registered with the county. They were allowed to roam consistently for 6 months. They attacked and killed a large number of pets on private property in Fort Dick over that period of 6 months. They were out loose after the owners were instructed to keep them contained. And when contained, they are kept on chains, which is against state law as per the deputy's report in January. I'm extremely disappointed in the county's lack of action and accountability in this situation. The underlying issue seems to be not a lack of staffing, but that no entity wants to bear the responsibility of resolving a tough situation. The board seems indifferent to this situation, which is disappointing. The way the Animal Control Department passed responsibility for the situation onto the private citizens of Fort Dick first, and then onto the Sheriff's Department is disappointing. The Sheriff's Department passed responsibility for the incident that didn't involve a person being bitten further on, and that was deeply disappointing. The hearing paperwork was finally filed Friday, April 8th. So it took a few months to get that in. It was clear throughout this experience that each entity expected me to become frustrated enough with the lack of help to just give up and let this issue go. I'm not prepared to do that. This entire situation should be a catalyst for our board to recognize a clear failure to serve the community, to address it, and to do better to resolve this incident specifically and incidents in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A little disappointed myself.
Yep.
Any other public comment?
Thank you.
My name is Susan Hubbard and I am next door neighbor for Crystal. Can you, yes, Susan Hubbard. I live in Fort Dick next door to Crystal, and I'm also been affected by the dogs. My cat was killed at the same time the dogs were observed on video. So it was up to left to the residents to identify where these dogs lived. That has been done. And it's even more difficult for residents and neighbors to approach the owners of the dogs because it's our understanding that were recently arrested on a violent crime. So makes people a little bit nervous about approaching people. And we're very affected by this in the neighborhood. We still have cats that are on our own property. The dogs have been seen going over fences, breaking down barricades to porches. And, residents are very concerned to the point that they are, want to shoot the dog. So we have a situation where residents are feeling they have to protect their property and their animals with guns, which is another safety concern. So we really encourage this problem to be solved. However that's done, we have codes in process to do that. So thank you for your time. I just wanted to let you know that there are real people out here being affected and we need to do something.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. That's really disappointing. Any other public comment?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is David Jones, and I want to bring an important issue to the board. With Ms. Maston being appointed and not elected to District 5 by her constituents, her being a member of the Yurok tribe and a former tribal council member, any issues that the Yurok tribe brings before the board, Ms. Maston must recuse herself from any discussion and vote because it will directly benefit her, her family, and is a huge conflict of interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Chair, I have none online.
Okay, thank you. So since there is no more public comment, I'm going to close the public comment period and we're going to move along to the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve the
Second.
I would like, I'm sorry,
and a second.
I
Go
had
ahead.
wanted to poll item number 14,
Okay.
which is the tax rate.
Chair, can we get clarification in number 14 just to discuss, or would she like to do that as a separate vote?
No, I don't, I just want to discuss.
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll pull that for discussion then. I have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and discuss item number 14.
And I just had questions regarding, so it's my understanding that there was just a question about the how the allocation rate was calculated. And then they approved our methodology, is what I understood. And then I was just wondering how the allocations are determined.
Clint's on.
This is on from the auditor controller. He's on beginning as well. Looks like through Zoom.
Clint, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so item number 14 has to do with the property tax rates. So we've been, that's one of the jobs that my office is tasked with is the allocation of property taxes. And we had a multi-year audit recently done, and the initial review, they felt that we were not tracking our assessed values and our base values correctly. And so we went through the process of updating those and had new staff in place. And what came to the board back in late September was an updated AB8 factors, which is what we use to allocate property taxes to the taxing entities. So if you look at the attachment, there's several entities there throughout the full county. After the audit was done, I had a turnover in staff and I brought in a local expert, and it was deemed that actually the state was incorrect and that our methodology for assessing and changing the base values and assessed values was acceptable. And so the state has actually kind of backpedaled on their audit and saying, oh no, you can go back to the way you were doing it. That's a reasonable methodology. So what's before you today was just kind of reversing their audit finding and going back to what we had done previously. By doing so, there is some small changes in the rates, which needs board approval.
Great. Thanks, Clinton. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Any further questions?
It just was, the last one was how our allocations are determined.
So the allocations are based on TRAs, tax revenue areas, and they're prorated as a total of the overall value of the county. So that's how we break down the value of the land within the tax rate areas as a percentage of the overall value of the county. So it's all adds up to the 1% sales, 1% property tax, and that's just broken down by value throughout the different agencies. So you'd see where, you know, a fire district might get a very small portion, where say the county gets a much larger portion. Depends on where the property value, where the properties lie within the county areas.
Does that answer your question, Susan?
No, but I can get clarification.
Okay. Anything else on that item? Anybody else? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any public comment on the consent agenda? Any of the consent agenda items? Okay. Seeing no public comment, then we'll bring it back to the board. Kylie, would you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Starkey?
Yes.
Supervisor Maston?
Yes.
Supervisor Short?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson?
Yes. And in that consent agenda, there's a couple of, or there's a resolution and a proclamation. Supervisor Starkey?
Yes, thank you. It's with great honor that I present this resolution of the Board of Supervisors of the County of Del Norte, State of California, honoring Supervisor Robert Bob Berkowitz. Whereas Robert Bob Berkowitz began his career with Del Norte County when he was elected into office as Supervisor of District 5 and took his oath of office in January 2017. And whereas Bob served one full term and one partial term as District 5 Supervisor, including 1 year as Vice Chairman in 2021. Whereas Bob served in the U.S. Navy from 1958 to 1960, and he has been known to say that his biggest accomplishment was serving his country. And whereas Bob taught high school for 13 years and created the first federally licensed high school radio station in Northern California. And whereas Bob purchased radio station KCRE AM in 1979 and built the first FM radio station in Del Norte County, KCRE FM, in 1980. That station won awards for small market stations and sales and promotions in 1982 during the National Association of Broadcasters Convention in Washington, D.C. And where Bob was a field representative for former Congressman Frank Riggs from 1994 to 1995. And during that time, he was instrumental in getting the legislation transferring U.S. Forest Service land to the Del Norte Unified School District so they could build a multi-purpose room on the Gasky School site. And whereas Bob served the County of Del Norte School Board of Trustees from January 1999 to December 2010, and he spent considerable time working with not only local issues, but he expanded his involvement on a state and federal level. Whereas it is said that Bob could identify potential leaders and provide them with the guidance they needed to win an election. And Bob went on to assist numerous current and past elected officials with navigating through the election process. He helped run multiple successful campaigns, including at least 5 of his own. Whereas Bob was awarded a National Achievement Award from NACO for civic education and public information. This award category honored innovative and effective programs that strengthened services for residents. Bob was recognized for holding his daily town hall meetings at a local restaurant. Supervisor Berkowitz made himself available 6 days a week at 6 a.m. for members of Del Norte County who wanted to have direct contact with a county supervisor. Whereas Bob was a positive influence within our region, and most importantly, Bob was a strong advocate for education for the children in our community. Whereas Bob was a husband, educator, mentor, and friend. Whereas Bob was a man of character, a man of good humor, a man who worked hard, who made friends from all walks of lives, served his country and his county with distinction, knowing when he walked away, he made a difference. Now therefore be it resolved that the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors hereby acknowledges the dedication of Bob Berkowitz during his years of service to Del Norte County and his positive influence within the community. And furthermore, thanks Bob's family for sharing him with us, passed and adopted by the Board of Supervisors of the County of Del Norte, State of California, this 12th day of April, 2022 by a unanimous vote. And if Supervisor Berkowitz's wife would like to accept the award.
Do you have anything you'd like to say? Okay, thank you. And Supervisor Howard has a proclamation.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Hemmingson. It's a proclamation for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Whereas sexualized violence affects children, youth, adults, elders of all genders from all racial, cultural, economic backgrounds with public health and social justice implications for every person in Del Norte County. Whereas it is estimated that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 7 boys will be sexually victimized by age 18. And whereas sex trafficking, exploitation happens in our community, disproportionately impacting the lives of youth, young adults in our community. And whereas recent national headlines indicate increased accountability and awareness, we as a community are presented with the opportunity to build on the momentum and create positive change locally. Whereas the county seat of Del Norte, Crescent City, and North Coast Rape Crisis Team have partnered to provide expanded emergency services to citizens impacted by trafficking, sexual assault, and domestic violence, benefiting all of Del Norte County. Whereas staff and volunteers of the North Coast Rape Crisis Team provide 24-hour service to survivors and their significant others to support those impacted and ensure survivors are not re-victimized. And whereas promotion of best practice response is accomplished through multidisciplinary teams such as the sexual assault response team, as well as partnerships with governmental, tribal, and community-based organizations. And whereas the North Coast Race Crisis Team provides prevention education, self-defense, awareness raising programs, encouraging every person to participate in ending sexualized violence and promoting social justice. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors reaffirms its commitment to the North Coast Rape Crisis Team and its vision, a world without violence, and acknowledges April 2022 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month, passed and adopted this day of April 12th, 2022, signed by Chair Hemmingson.
Thank you. Hi, my
Hi.
name is Autumn. I'm with the North Coast Rape Crisis Team. We would like to thank the board for once again recognizing April as Sexual Assault Awareness and Child Abuse Prevention Month. Each year is a reminder that these issues are still affecting our community, yet it is also an opportunity to honor those we serve. We work each day to provide 24-hour free and confidential services to people of all ages, gender identities, and socioeconomic circumstances who have been impacted by this violence. We at NCRCT believe that violence is a choice that no one deserves to be hurt, and that as a community, we can work to promote safety and accountability. To those ends, we participate in a variety of collaborations and multidisciplinary teams with other community, governmental, and tribal organizations. Thanks to the Community Development Block Grant, NCRCTs is able to provide resources such as temporary shelter, gas, food, and other emergency-related services. Empowering survivors to meet those immediate needs is often a first step in healing from sexual violence. We also strive to raise awareness and provide prevention education in the community. We do this by providing a wide range of violence prevention programs for children, teens, and adults throughout the year. Additionally, NCRCT provides sexual harassment training for employees and law enforcement trainings according to state mandates. April 27th is International Jeans for Justice Day, which began in 1999 as part of an international protest of the Italian court decision to overturn a rape conviction. The court dismissed charges of a 45-year-old rape suspect because his 18-year-old victim was wearing jeans. We want to expel the notion that what a survivor wears impacts whether they will be sexually assaulted. Jeans for Justice gives each of us the opportunity to stand with and for survivors, to let them know that what happened to them was not their fault, and to hold those who chose violence accountable for the choices they make. NCRCT encourages all community members to support survivors. If you would like additional information on Jeans for Justice, just let us know. NCRCT appreciates your support. You can find more information about our April events on our Facebook page or at ncrct.org. Thank you. With you as a community partners, we truly can work towards our vision, a world without violence.
Thank you.
Thanks for your work.
Appreciate it. Okay, now we have a 10:40 timed item. We're running a little bit behind. Approve and adopt a resolution amending the general plan use designation for a 4.25 plus or minus acre portion of assessor parcel 141-140-013 from rural residential, one dwelling unit for 2 acres to visitor serving commercial, and 2, adopt an ordinance amending ordinance 67-10 and title 20 zoning by adopting a new zoning map for area H-18 to rezone a 4.25 plus or minus acre portion of assessor parcel number 141-140-013 from forest recreation 2 acre minimum lot size to commercial residential as requested by Director Heidi Kunstler of Community Development.
Good morning, board.
I wasn't sure you were here. You were hiding behind Neil.
I
and that's
was.
hard to do.
But I can do it.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, thank you for having this item on today's agenda. Would you like a brief overview of what the recommendation itself provides quite a big idea of what's going
Yeah,
on, but
very brief if you want.
okay, sure. Ms. Barber owns close to a 24 acre parcel. She'd like to amend the zoning and land use for roughly 4.25 acres in order to convert it to allow for visitor serving uses. She received contingent approval for a use permit for a 12-space RV park by the County Planning Commission. And then she also plans to construct a tap room, which would provide an additional, restaurant type service for the Klamath Glen area.
Cool. Okay.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay. I have a motion.
I'll second it.
Any further questions for Heidi from anybody? No?
I just want to say one more time, Heidi, you do such a thorough job. So that's why we don't have questions. I mean, because you just explain everything so well in all your reports. You're the gold star.
Thank you.
Do you think there's any purpose to that? She is the gold standard. Yes, she does. Can't be said enough. Any public comment on this item?
Chair, I have none online.
Thank you. Seeing no public comment, then we'll move on, bring it back to the board. Any further discussion? Kylie, please pull the vote.
Supervisor Howard,
Yes.
Supervisor Short,
Yes.
Supervisor Starkey,
Yes.
Supervisor Maston,
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson.
Yes. Okay, we're catching up. We have a 10:50 timed item. Receive the housing element study session presentation for the public review draft of the Delmarva County 2022 to 2030 housing element as requested by our one and only.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
We have our team from Mintier Harnish, our consultant who is preparing the 6th cycle update of our housing element. They are available virtually to give a presentation to you this morning regarding the public review draft of the housing element update.
Great.
Great. Thank you for having me. I have a presentation I'll share here.
Right on.
So once again, thank you for having me to talk about the housing element update. I'll try to make this quick and not take too much of your time, but it's quite a bit to go through. So my name is Ryan Lester, and I'm the assistant project manager for the project. I'm with Mintier Harnish. With us also is Brent Gibbons, the project manager, and then Vanessa Blodgett with Plan West Partners. And her firm was tasked with handling the site's inventory, and they did a great job with that. What are we going to do today? We'll talk about housing element basics and the regional housing needs allocation. We'll talk about the updates we made in the 6th cycle, the overall project schedule, our community engagement efforts, and the next steps in the process. So housing element basics. What is a housing element? Well, a housing element is an element of the general plan, but it's the only element that is reviewed and certified by the state. Updates are required by state law in 8-year cycles, of which we're currently in the 6th housing element cycle. And then the schedule for each cycle is determined by the state. So the deadline for this cycle is September 15th. So what does a housing element do? It provides an assessment of housing needs, both current and projected to the year 2030. We're planning for the next 8 years. It identifies opportunities and barriers to housing production, and then establishes goals, policies, and programs to both meet the housing needs and address those barriers. And then finally, the housing element works to update county policies, programs, and regulations to reflect new state laws regarding housing. I have 2 slides here of a lot of new, these are all new pieces of legislation that came out between the 5th and 6th cycle. So we have to respond to each one of these in the housing element and address any compliance issues. So this is the first page. We have a whole nother page of them, ADUs, density bonus law, emergency and transitional housing. There's a lot of new state laws. Housing is a real priority at the state, as you all know. And so we have to react and make sure that the county complies with each of these state laws. So what are our objectives? What are we really trying to do with the housing? So we're working to conserve and improve existing affordable housing, right? Keep what you have. And then to maximize housing opportunities throughout the community. And throughout the community is very important in this cycle. We'll get into that as we go through the slides here. And then we're working to remove governmental and other constraints or barriers to housing investment. And then finally, to promote fair and equal housing opportunities. So the sections of the housing element, the key sections can be broken down like this. There's the needs assessment that looks at data and projected housing needs. There's the housing sites inventory, which actually identifies the residential capacity to meet the identified housing needs. So where are we zoned for residential and what's vacant? What kind of capacity do we have? We look at constraints on housing, or barriers, you might call them. And we discuss both non-governmental and governmental constraints. And as far as governmental constraints or barriers, when we identify them in the housing element, then we have to make a plan for overcoming those. There's a new section called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. And this looks at fair housing data and issues in the county and really works to proactively further fair housing. So we're looking at both data and county practices to look at fair housing. And then finally, the policy document. The policy document is really like any element of the general plan. It's goals, policies, and programs, but we really need to have our programs respond directly to any identified needs in the housing element, any identified constraints or barriers, and then finally to the AFFH analysis. So what are our goals? There's the regional housing needs allocation is the quantified housing goal for each jurisdiction in the county or in the state, including both the county and the city of Crescent City. So the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA as it's commonly known, is it's the projection of housing needs in the county for the next 8 years, and it's an individual projection for each income level. There's very low income, moderate income, and above moderate. And those are really the numbers that we are looking to provide capacity for in the housing element. So those numbers are first prepared regionally by the Department of Housing and Community Development. And then those are passed down to regional COGS, or in this case, HCD, who make a methodology for splitting up those units between the jurisdictions in that region. The jurisdictions then plan for residential capacity to meet those numbers in their housing element. And then each year during the housing element cycle, the county has to report the number of permitted units. The state takes all that data, compares the two, and creates a regional determination in the next round. So you can see the kind of 8-year cyclical pattern. The sixth cycle, we're looking at units approved, permitted, or built between December 31st, 2022 and September 15th, 2030. So the RHNA, this is what the RHNA looks like. You can see the total units for the county is 386 units we need to plan for. And then those are split up between the income categories as shown here. Notably, more than 40% of the RHNA is for sites that can accommodate lower income categories. And in order to do that, we have to allow 15 dwelling units an acre in these zones identified as lower income capacity. So these two tables show kind of a breakdown of the RHNA comparing the fifth and sixth cycle. And what I want you to take away from this is that in the sixth cycle, the RHNA is much higher. In the fifth cycle, we were looking at a total of 233 units. And in the sixth cycle, we had to plan for 386. This is a statewide increase. Every jurisdiction in the state has seen an increase in line with this, so it's not out of the ordinary. And luckily, while other jurisdictions may really be struggling to provide that capacity, the county has plenty of capacity, and Vanessa and her team have done a great job to identify that. And then in the bottom table, we have just the kind of distribution between the fifth and sixth cycles. You'll see that the distribution is about the same, a smaller percentage of above moderate units and a slightly larger percentage of low income units here. So updates for the sixth cycle, what have we done? So we used a range of approaches to try to meet housing needs. First, reduce constraints or barriers to housing production. We provided residential capacity to meet the RHNA. We're working to allow residential uses in commercial zones. That's actually a program to provide additional support to existing housing programs. And then finally, again, to update regulations to meet state requirements. Key changes. So the housing needs chapter was updated to reflect new data and conditions from 2014 to 2020. The last housing element was written in 2014. So we're looking at trends beyond that. The constraints section was updated based on all those new state laws. And we looked at the zoning code and looked for compliance issues. And then as well from feedback from stakeholders in the community. So what did we hear were constraints? The housing sites inventory was updated based on building activity, but the fifth cycle sites were continued. We added 2 new sites, site 11 and site 13. These are commercial sites that were added just because they have potential for residential capacity. And then we haven't proposed any rezones as part of this update. Currently, a lot of jurisdictions have to rezone or upzone areas in major ways to provide that lower income need, and we don't need to in this case. So the affirmatively furthering fair housing chapter was update. It's totally new. So this is a section that is rather long. It has a number of maps. The state identifies the data sources, and they even create the basic map layers. We take those and we analyze those and we write those up. So that's a whole new section. And then the goals, policies, and programs were updated, of course, to respond directly to the housing needs that we identified, to new state laws, to constraints that we identified, and then to the AFFH analysis. And if you've read the 5th cycle housing element and you look at the 6th cycle, you may be shocked by the number of programs that we have. But I just want to say that while the update includes a lot of new programs, each program is included to directly respond to something in the housing element, whether it be an identified need or constraint or something in the AFFH analysis to further fair housing. And that due to county funding constraints, we didn't propose additional programs beyond those required by state law. Those required by state law are, there's quite a lot. So we didn't feel the need to go any further at this time. So we had a study session with the Planning Commission, and I wanted to report out what the comments that we received, because as with your comments, we will integrate those before sending off to the state for review. So the first comment, I want to mention these comments and mention some options for how we might deal with them, and then get your feedback, particularly on the first comment. So we had a public comment that vacation rentals are a constraint to housing in the county. We've heard this before, but we know it's a complicated issue. There are some options that can be pursued through the zoning code and through an ordinance. Vacation rentals can be prohibited, they can be limited. There are some options, but we wanted to get your feedback on the issue and what you feel might be some solutions to that if you feel it is a constraint. And then the Planning Commission had a number of comments. The first comment was that the timing of water and sewer connection fees can pose a constraint just because it has to be paid up front so early in the process. Unfortunately, from what I understand, those fees are collected by the city, so there may not be much we can do there. The listed fee totals in the housing element may underestimate costs. We actually spoke with the planning commissioner that had this comment, and he made some suggestions to us, and we will integrate those in the draft. We received a comment that the document is long and dense, and that we should consider readability, and I completely agree. So actually, we are going to, from this point on, we're going to separate the kind of technical background report sections from the policy document. They'll actually be under 2 covers, and the policy document will include some of the introductory statements and goals, what we're doing, as well as key findings from the background report, so that that is more of something especially staff will be accessing on a regular basis. They don't need to go through the 100 pages of background info. So we'll be making that change. And then there was a comment that with our programs, we should work to address barriers and barrier removal, and that we should prioritize actions. Love the comment. That's exactly what we're trying to do. We often use the word constraints, but same thing. So that's exactly what we're trying to do with our programs. And then with our programs, we have to actually provide a timeline for when those might happen. And that's really how we prioritize those actions. I would also say that this project is larger than just the housing element itself. So as we'll get into later, in further phases of the project, we'll actually be getting into implementing those actions. So the housing element project actually really prioritizes actions in ways that most housing elements don't. Usually it's just get certification, and then the city or county will figure out how to enact those programs. Well, we're going to work with you on implementing them immediately, as many as we can. There was a comment to ensure coordination with potential local and regional developers. Great comment. We really try to do this. It's very important to us. So I appreciate the comment. And then there was a comment to define fair housing more clearly. and that the requirements weren't clearly stated. And I will be updating the AFFH section at the beginning to do so. So those are the comments that we heard in the Planning Commission. And we can talk about those in a minute. I just quickly wanted to go through the larger schedule. So as I mentioned, we do have the housing element that we're currently working on. So phase 1 was the sites inventory, and phase 2 is the draft housing element carried through HCD certification. And then we will immediately be working on implementing one or more of the programs identified in the housing element, as well as creating objective residential design standards and by right development amendments, really to encourage housing production. In phase 5, we'll do our environmental documentation on those changes. And then in phase 6, we'll actually work with you on amendments to your ordinance directly based on what we've identified in the housing element. Our community engagement efforts so far, we did stakeholder interviews. We've held 2 community workshops. We're doing study sessions with the Planning Commission and you all. And then after HCD comments and revisions, then we'll bring the document back to both the Planning Commission and the board for comment and adoption. We have put out 2 newsletters. We have a website, housingdelnorte.com. We've done e-blasts, stakeholder interviews, as I said, virtual events, actually really encourage participation. Just because it's hard to, especially countywide, if you live further away from where they're holding the event, you're not likely to go. So our virtual events have actually encouraged participation in a great way. Online commenting, people can comment through the website at any time, and then study sessions and hearings. We did 2 newsletters. The first was housing element overview, explaining a lot of the basics of what is a housing element, what are we up to, and then newsletter number 2 announced the public review draft. I wanted to point out on our website, housingdelnorte.com, this orange button here allows residents to sign up for the email list, and the green button allows them to provide us with a comment at any time. And then this little button down here is an accessibility widget. You can click that if you want larger text or you need an larger spacing, anything for visual accessibility. Our next steps in the process. So we are going to revise the element based on Planning Commission, board, and community input from these study sessions. Then we'll post that revised element to the project website for 10 days so that it's publicly visible, right? After that 10 days, we'll submit to HCD for 90-day review. They will most likely take the full 90 days and they will submit a letter with all their comments. And then following that HCD review and comments, the county, we will revise the element to respond to those. And then we'll hold those public meetings with both the Planning Commission and board to review the revised document and adopt it. At that point, we'll then submit it back to HCD, who will take another 60 days to review it before certifying. So I just wanted to thank you so much. I would love to get your feedback generally, also on the issue of vacation rentals, and if we have an opportunity there. And then if there's an opportunity for public comment on this matter, I would very much appreciate it. We would love to document that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from board members?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I reviewed the document. I just had several questions about, there were other elements that are required to be updated in order to meet the elements in the housing element, such as safety. How are you tracking those, and so that we make sure those occur at the same time to address the needs of the housing element? And then I did some questions over the site selections, and I was looking at some of the mapping, and I just wanted to know, with those, do they meet those provisions for the homeless and the low or extreme low requirements for having stores, medical, social service, and transportation accessible to them, because that was not clear when I was looking at some of the site selections. And then there was a place where it was talking about the housing element, was talking about incentives beyond the density bonus provisions. And I was trying to, I didn't see what those were. And so I was wondering what those were. And then how are we tracking? Because I seen that we're out of compliance with almost every state law. And I was wondering how we're tracking those. And so is there like a matrix that we're doing for the housing element that tracks our progress, our evaluation, or our compliance with the state law?
So I can start by answering your final question there. As far as our programs are, the housing element, the programs are housed in a table, right? It's a really long table. Every year, as part of the annual progress report, the county will have to take that table and add a comment or add a column for comments on, their evaluation of what's been done so far. So each year, the county has to report on each of those programs and on progress towards implementation. Brent, could you speak to the safety element issue?
Sure. Good morning, board. I can speak to the element. You are right. The state does mandate that when you update a housing element, there are other triggers that you have to also meet in order to satisfy other general plan requirements as required by OPR, which is the Office of Planning and Research under the governor of the state of California. We're working with Heidi and staff to determine what next steps would be on that. The document doesn't necessarily need to be prepared in conjunction with. There can be a program and a timeline that ties a safety element update as part of that, but there's still ongoing discussions. And since we're working through the next phase, which is the implementation of the housing element, we can tackle that as part of that portion of the update. I can also touch on the second segment of density bonus provision. So at a base minimum, the state has their own requirements of what has to be in your zoning code or your zoning ordinance that tackles density bonus. Most communities just go with what the state mandates at a base minimum. Communities do have the ability to go beyond that to include more stringent standards to where density bonus is tailored even more to unique aspects of each city or county. And so that is an option on the table that if the board would like us and the planning team to explore further, we can look at that as part of the overall implementation of that program in the housing.
And then just in general, I was wondering, because the last time we updated our general plan was in 2003. So what other elements have we updated since then?
Outside of the housing element, we've only had minor amendments to, I believe, likely just the safety element. So it has not been updated since then.
We might want to consider updating our general plan at some point.
Yes. And that is something we think about frequently. However, we really that has to be very well planned. It's going to be a very costly update because not only do you have the cost of preparing the general plan update, you also have the CEQA, the environmental review that goes along with it. And so we have a general plan maintenance fund where we collect fees as part of our building permit applications. And those funds are presently being held for the future general plan update.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi.
I have just a couple questions, Chair, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Supervisor Stark.
I just for some clarification, because when you say 386 units, do you mean houses? I mean, when you say that we need that 386 units, what does that look like? And it's probably in the body of the report, and I did not read it.
It's okay. So to provide for the RENA in the housing element, the county just has to identify land that's zoned residential that's available for development. It can be completely vacant, it could be underutilized, and if there's an assumption that it can be developed in the next 8 years. So that's what we're looking to do. And you'll notice that the county has quite a bit of land identified in the sites inventory.
Okay, because I'll just let you know that after one public meeting, now I'm getting bombarded with the Mary Peacock site, so that's site 9, that we are going to put apartment complexes on there for 1,200 people, and we're importing people in from Los Angeles to live there. So I just wanted to really make sure that this is, that we're clear what the purpose of this is, and that is just to identify potential land to meet our needs, which you are saying is 386 units within the next 8 years. Is that correct?
Yes, we're just identifying land with the potential. The county then just has to wait for applications to come in. There's no assumption of production.
Perfect. That, I just really wanted that clear for my constituents. Thank you.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a great report, and I do applaud the level of detail. It does need to be in here. It's actually really a good reflection of where we're at countywide and growth that we're seeing here. It's good to see the 3% trend in housing. There was a time here that we didn't have that, and we're seeing it now, and it's good to see. More importantly, I want to reflect back on what Supervisor Starkey was discussing. I know she was specifically pulling out the 386, which was for the unincorporated parts of Del Norte County, plus the city, which adds the 575. 71 of those 575, both incorporated, unincorporated areas, are for the low income. Can you, what does that entail? Tell me what kind of structure that is. Is it the apartments that Supervisor Starkey's discussing? I mean, what is a low income house?
Sure. So in the sites inventory, we're not actually talking about housing types, right? We're identifying land. So in order to identify land that work for those lower income categories, we have to identify land that includes a certain default density. So for the county, the state says that that's 15. In some cities, it's 20, and then in major metropolitan cities, it's 30, right? And so we have to identify residentially zoned land that allows up to or beyond 15 dwelling units an acre.
Okay.
So
Doesn't
that
get
land,
too specific.
yeah, and that land may be developed much lower than that. It doesn't have to be, right? Because you're just allowing for it. The reality of development will still dictate what happens there. Yeah.
Thank you. And then I'd also like to, Ryan, discuss a little bit about issues that have been coming down from the state that kind of, I think, put a real deterrent on growth essentially associated with housing, especially in our areas like our wild urban land interfaces. Are you looking at how Board of Forestry regulations or regulations coming out of the state coastal commission are affecting that with sea level rise policy, and how that might restrict this 6th cycle, and most importantly, that 575 number?
So with our individual sites, we have to identify environmental constraints. So flood constraints, fire constraints, even in some places like extreme slopes, there's a number of environmental constraints that we have to consider. And so those are considered on a site-by-site basis.
Okay, so that level of detail wouldn't necessarily be in here at this time, because the regulation that's currently being debated and proposed and has been on our watch list now for about 1.5 years would pretty much eliminate a lot of what we see as available land for single family units within these areas like Smith River, Gasky, and Hyuchi and Klamath. Not that you could tease that out, but I know counties have been able to, like Humboldt County, with the right geographic information systems, been able to tease out that data to see where the constraints would kind of go against where we're looking to actually see some expansion and growth in housing availability.
Okay, I mean, we can certainly look into that for sure.
Supervisor Short, anything? Nothing? I have a quick comment for Brent. Brett, and then a question for you, Ryan. My comment to Brett is go Giants. And my question for you, Ryan, is can you give me some examples of removing governmental constraints other than rezone? Can you give me a couple of examples of, I mean, it looks to me like there seems to be, it's always other requirements that are required. And now you're saying that there's a way to remove some constraints. Is there a way that we get around the coastal commission, or, I mean, what is it that you're talking about?
Yeah, so the constraints, a lot of them were identified actually in new state law. So a lot of those new state laws, like on transitional and supportive housing, the state with those laws considers, the state requires that jurisdictions allow transitional and supportive housing in all residential districts, right? So if you don't, that's a constraint, right? So we would identify in the housing element, here's the state law. It says these have to be allowed here, here, and here. The county either allows it or doesn't allow it. And if they don't allow it, then it's a constraint. And we need to put a program into the housing element that says the county will update their ordinance to comply with, you know, with the law. So transitional and supportive housing, housing for, excuse me, for special needs populations. There are a number of constraints that we have to look at.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me. Is there anyone else on the board that has questions?
I guess, and maybe this is a two-part question, Ryan. I'm just looking on page 28 of the example, and this is really a good graph, but it's table 31. You know, we're looking at 3 income levels in this table below $10,000, and these are for families or non-family household incomes. Less than $10,000 is one category, $10,000 to $15,000, and then $15,000 to $25,000 as total household income categories. And we're looking at, you know, close to 25% of our population within this category range. The question would be, how does a household, how does a family afford the housing potentially that this county could provide when they're at this level of income? What programs are available, and do you look at those within this plan?
Yeah, so you know, that's part of what we're reporting on, right? So
yep,
what are the income levels? And then we talk about median rent in the fair housing section. So we look at median rent in the county, compare it to other regions, and look at how people what they can afford to pay. In everywhere in California, even in Del Norte County, incomes aren't keeping up with rent and with the cost of housing. So that is a constraint, and doing anything we can do to keep the cost of housing down would be a way to work towards a solution, right? So streamlining development, we talked about objective design standards, right? So not submitting projects with more than 4 units to a large discretionary review, right? To come up with your standards in advance that are objective, so that projects can get through the process more quickly and keep costs down, right? So those are the kind of solutions that we are exploring in the housing element.
Okay. I guess the last question, Chair, if I may. I can't remember what assembly bill it was. Maybe it was 671 or 670 on the ADUs. I think it was 2018, 2019, this legislation came down, and there was very little input the county could give into where an accessory dwelling unit was located. How are ADUs factored into this plan?
So we are allowed to use an assumption of ADUs towards actually meeting our RHNA. But then the other way, so we bring them up in the sites inventory, but also we have to report that, that if the county's ordinance needs to be updated based on all these new laws, right? So bringing that, having a program in the housing element to bring the ordinance up to date is how we address that in the housing element. So identifying where we don't comply and then having a program for compliance. And typically those programs need to be handled in the first 3 years of the planning period. HCD wants them, they want them handled quickly. And there were part of why our project is larger than just writing the housing element is because the county struggled to implement a number of their programs in the previous housing element. So we've actually, we've obtained funding through grants to actually begin implementing those, to put the objective standards in place and to work with you directly on those things.
Sure.
I will jump in here too, Ryan. I do want to point out that as a reminder, as part of the implementation, we are going to work with county staff to pull together a up-to-date, in compliance with state law ADU ordinance. There are several changes that have come about since 2019. One of them being that ADUs are now allowed on multifamily properties. You can convert parking spaces, community rooms. There's a whole host of new exceptions. So we'll work with Heidi and her team to prepare that. That will come before the Planning Commission and then before all of you at the board.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'll open it up. Yeah, Heidi, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing, that while our ADU ordinance is not up to date, county staff follows state law. So when the public comes in to inquire about accessory dwelling units, we are following what is in the state, has on the books.
Yeah. Is there any public comment on this presentation? Okay.
Hello, yeah, my name is Elias Mavris. I want to congratulate Susan Maston for filling a seat and taking part of this community. I agree with your opening statements as well. As far as the land and stuff like that goes, we have the largest undeveloped piece of property in the city of Del Norte, and with my family, and 12 acres. And I'm willing to hear any comments on what's the best for that area. So also I wanted to find out, yesterday there was a meeting on the parks. I don't know if that got dropped. I was here yesterday at 5:30. Thanks.
I'm not aware of a meeting. Heidi, go ahead.
As Mr. Mavris identified, his family's property is located within the city limits. Prior to the 2004 Roosevelt annexation, it was part of the county, and we did have it included in our RENA and our housing element for multifamily. That if you want input for me, who has no bearing on it, yeah, it was identified as being suitable for multifamily at that point.
Thanks. Okay. Moving on. Thank you very much, Ryan, Brent. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to move on to item number 19, which is to receive and review the fiscal year 2021-2022 Measure R repeal impact report and PowerPoint presentation, and to receive and review the fiscal year 2021-2022 Measure R budget overview, update report, and PowerPoint presentation as prepared by the county administrative officer and the assistant county administrative officer. Neil?
Right, thank you, Chair, Supervisors. In the agenda packet today, there were two reports that were prepared by myself. One to provide an update for the fiscal year 21-22 Measure R budget. And it's more just an overview of the budget that was adopted in September by the Board of Supervisors. In addition to that, there was a report that was directed by the board on the March 8th, 2022 meeting to prepare.
I'm sorry, can you speak a little louder?
Sure.
Even though you're close to me?
That we were directed to prepare pursuant to election code 9118C in regards to the impacts or potential impacts if the repeal efforts for Measure R were successful. And this is a PowerPoint
that summarizes those two reports. In addition to that, there were several statements provided by the departments who have received Measure R funding to support some of the vital services in this community and the impacts that they feel will come from the repeal of Measure R.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
One thing that would have been helpful for me, and I think helpful for the public, would be if we knew where and how much was allocated to these different areas, because that's what I didn't see. I seen the justification and that was well written, but I would like to know how much went to those specific places.
It's included in this report.
It is?
Yeah, and the actual budget overview, the initial report that I submitted should have the amount allocated to each of these areas as well.
I didn't see it. Maybe it was. I see that some totals, but I didn't see like totals went to, law enforcement to support X, or total went to here for X. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, they're in there in the report that's titled Measure Our Budget Overview and Update. Law enforcement, $748,700.
What page are you on?
I don't have a page number on it. It's one of my reports that I submitted with the agenda. It's also
Okay.
included in the summary, the PowerPoint. I don't know about that.
Okay, I'll look for it there.
Okay. Okay, as all of you are aware, Measure R is a 1% sales tax that was imposed in the unincorporated areas of the county, approved by voters in November of 2020 to support vital local services. Those include support for law enforcement, for emergency response and community safety, repairing potholes and maintaining streets, preparing for and responding to natural disasters and emergencies, maintaining emergency dispatch services for fire, ambulance, and law enforcement, maintaining jail and criminal justice services, addressing blight and public nuisances, and delivery of other general services and maintaining infrastructure. Measure R was projected to generate 1.2 million annually. The auditor controller has since changed that projection for the year end of fiscal year 21-22 to be $1.8 million. Currently through December of 2021, is which we've received a Measure R funding for, is a little over $900,000. The excess revenue can significantly increase the county's ability to dedicate funding to expand and improve upon the vital services that were specifically approved by voters under the passage of this measure. This presentation is intended to provide the board and public with an overview of how Measure R funds were budgeted and information related to impacts should Measure R be repealed by the voters. Fiscal year 21-22 Measure R funds. Uses that were approved by the board in September of 2021. Support law enforcement and emergency response. That includes the sheriff's office, which also includes the jail, probation department, which also includes juvenile hall, and the district attorney's office. Budgeted for support of law enforcement was $748,700 of Measure R. That included wage adjustments for out-of-market positions in law enforcement through prior comp analysis that have been done in the past several years. Our local law enforcement positions are typically out of market significantly, and usually the most significantly compared to other jurisdictions. The wage adjustments were geared towards sheriff's office patrol positions, probation officers, both adult and juvenile, district attorney investigators, correctional staff, adult and juvenile, and dispatch in the creation of a new dispatch position, administrative support position that was also in the sheriff's office. The sheriff office currently only has one administrative support position. With Measure R, we were able to create a second position, which helps with the backlog and many of the administrative duties that are required for that office. Also budgeted through Measure R for law enforcement was vehicle replacement. And as I just mentioned, the addition of those two positions. Addressing blight and public nuisance, the board approved the addition of a code enforcement officer at $76,500. Also responding to natural disasters and health emergencies, there was additional position created for Office of Emergency Services. Animal services, there was a position created for an animal services supervisor. There were also some wage adjustments that were approved for animal control officers. With those wage adjustments was an increase in minimum qualifications required for those positions, which included additional education and training. Vital services for planning department, which also included an additional planning position. And $475,000 budgeted towards infrastructure and capital improvements. I want to make clear that the positions that were created for code enforcement, planning, and Office of Emergency Services has just increased those staffing levels to 2 people in each of those departments for a county this size. For the longest time, we'd have 1 position in each of those departments, and the demand for services far exceeds the staffing capacity that we currently have. Some of the impact statements that were provided to the county administration through the departments. Measure R repeal department impacts for animal services, impacts to recruitment and retention of staff and staff morale, diminished ability to capture revenue from various sources, including unclaimed gas tax and mill tax due to reduction in staffing levels, inability to modernize case tracking and licensing software without necessary funding, reduced departmental safety and overall ability to provide vital services, including responding to animal services situations arising in the community, such as nuisance and neglect. Code enforcement is a decrease in services and enforcement, escalating decay of homes and structures when not addressed in a timely manner, continued neighborhood safety concerns, perceived and real loss of property values, diminished interest in improving property adjacent to blighted areas, increased unsightliness and impacts from environmental hazardous waste, further encroachment into residential and commercial areas, decrease in employee safety, and inability to meet the demand and expectations of the community for code enforcement and blight. District Attorney's Office, impact to recruitment, retention, and staff morale as well. Measure R has allowed salaries to be able to be brought up to be more competitive with other agencies who have historically siphoned employees off of Del Norte County. Diminished ability to provide vital community services, including criminal investigations, inability to replace aging vehicles and employee safety equipment. Emergency services, reduced ability to prepare for and respond to natural disasters and health emergencies, staff burnout resulting from being stretched too thin, particularly during emergencies and disasters, loss of public confidence in emergency preparedness due to inability to engage with the community on a regular training and exercise, cost to general fund to maintain approved staffing, inability to address obvious staff deficiencies and improve, expand critical emergency preparedness services as measure are intended, inability to look at additional grant funding due to insufficient staffing. Plan.
So if staff could provide me, I was missing those pages in my packet that laid out the budgets. If I could just get a copy of that.
There you go.
Okay, impacts to planning as provided by the CDD director. Prolonged review process for development permits. Longer return times for responses to planning questions, often related to current and future development. Staff burnout, loss of institutional knowledge when existing staff seeks work elsewhere. Lower morale from existing frontline staff due to public resources or public pressures and frustrations from not obtaining permits and information in a timely manner. Missed opportunities for development due to time delays in responding to requests for information. Possible state oversight of some programs if the county can't perform reporting inspection responsibilities in a timely manner. Lack of redundancy in one planner if one planner leaves or is away for a prolonged period. Potential inability to seek funding if the jurisdiction falls into poor standing with funding agencies. Example is unmet grant responsibilities, loss of CDBG funds if housing element programs are not accounted for. Probation impacts, impacts to recruitment, retention, employee health and safety, and staff morale. Impact general fund budgets and staffing levels. Diminished ability to address deferred maintenance and required capital improvements at the juvenile hall. An example is a new control system that's badly needed. Increased difficulty meeting staffing levels mandated with loss of measure R wage adjustments. Sheriff's Office, impact to recruitment and retention. a common theme throughout this report. Measure R has allowed salaries to be able to be brought up to more competitive with other nearby law enforcement agencies who have historically siphoned employees from Delaware County. Repealing Measure R continues the cycle of turnover and the department's struggle to fill vacant positions, resulting in significant impacts to community and officer safety. Diminished ability to provide around-the-clock patrol services in unincorporated areas. Dispatch services would be negatively affected. Diminished ability to address outstanding issues with jail facilities. Diminished ability to maintain existing level of jail medical services. Diminished ability to provide safe, reliable patrol vehicles and employee safety gear and equipment. Measure R, as you know, the board created the oversight committee. There are seven total members of the oversight committee, 5 voting members appointed by the Board of Supervisors are members of public residing within the unincorporated area of the county. There are 2 non-voting members, county administrative officer and the auditor controller, required to meet at least annually and publicly report on the revenues generated by Measure R and to ensure the uses of Measure R revenues were for vital services. Every department which receive Measure R funds during the fiscal year are required to prepare and submit a written report to the committee regarding the use of the funding and whether any other funding source was supplanted by Measure R funds. During the meeting of the Board of Supervisors in which the recommended budget is adopted, which is typically the second meeting in June, the committee shall make a report of its findings, specifically answering the following questions. During the fiscal year being reviewed, were all Measure R funds spent on vital services as described in the ballot question for Measure R? If any Measure R funds were not spent on vital local services, what were they spent on? Was any Measure R funding used to supplant or displace another funding source in any department's budget? The committee may submit its findings to the board in writing or may select one of its voting members to make a presentation to the Board of Supervisors. The committee at its discretion may meet after the end of the fiscal year also, but prior to the adoption of the final budget and may update its findings if necessary. Revenue expenditures are accounted for in a separate fund for transparency and more effective oversight. Some of the misinformation that is out in the community right now is that Measure R funds are being accounted for in the general fund. That is incorrect. The board and the auditor controller created a separate fund for Measure R funds for the ability for the public to better be able to, for transparency purposes, basically. It's easy to account for the revenue and expenditures each fiscal year for the Measure R funds because it is accounted for separately, basically in a separate checking account. There's also an annual audit for Measure R funds that is conducted annually through the auditor controller's office. And that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions from the board?
Thank you, Neil. Questions? Seeing no questions from board members, public comment.
Good morning again, board. My name is David Jones. I am the spokesman for the Measure R Oversight Committee. I would just like to say that we've met more than once. In fact, we're going to have another meeting at the end of this month to go over what the budget has been done for over the past year. I want to commend you guys for what you have done in the way of the expenditures for such a small community, that we've actually increased our services for our county. Trust me, I didn't vote for Measure R when it came up, but I wanted to make sure that I was on the oversight committee so we can make sure that the funds are generated and spent correctly. And I really think it'll be a bad decision if the Measure R is repealed, because it'll definitely hurt all of our services and impact the entire county negatively. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Chair, I have some online also. I can wait, sorry.
Norma, go ahead.
Basically kill 2 agenda items with 1 stone, since number 20 also addresses Measure R. I'm Norma Williams, chapter president of the Del Norte County Employees Association, SEIU 1021. And our executive board has been meeting on this issue, as I had mentioned at last month's Board of Supervisors meeting. After much discussion and after reading both reports that the county had submitted, We unanimously voted and agreed to strongly recommend to county employees and to our community to vote no to repeal Measure R on November 8th. The impact report is very, very specific and clear. Also, and I'm only going to address those areas and the employees we represent. I cannot speak for SCA nor for mid-management. However, we in good faith negotiated wages overall for all county employees. There are specific additional raises, increases for those in public safety, namely in probation, which includes juvenile hall, as well as the district attorney's office. If the repeal is successful, we are looking at a 0.5 to 3% cut in pay for those employees. Now, given the fact that inflation is now 8.5% as of this morning, that's a considerable amount of money. And that would severely impact staffing in those areas. Not only would it impact morale, but it definitely would impact and jeopardize staffing. You're also looking at the fact that if you dial back the budgets to pre-Measure R funding, that could also impact the very people who have been hired as a result of Measure R. In the community development area, in animal control, obviously in Office of Emergency Services. It could then, as a result, in a reduction of staff, you're then looking at a potential reduction in programs and services being offered. Those very programs and services that the community demands and often complains about wanting to receive. Also, at the same time, trying not to lose my train of thought here. But you're also looking at the fact that you're also then would be looking at a reduction in revenue. And you're looking at general fund revenue. Normally, what would be general fund revenue in terms of collections of fees, any collections of application fees, any permit fees, any planning fees, any administrative fees, even any penalties for any violations of code that we have here in the county. And that would definitely be problematic for future budget concerns in those various departments, which again would impact and negatively impact staffing. I think overall what we're looking at here is the fact that we are county employees, we're dedicated employees, and the union does not want to see any cut in pay to those who we did, in all honesty and in good faith, negotiated wage increases for.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you.
Kylie, you have some people online?
Yes, give me a moment. Linda, you are on. You just need to unmute your mic.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so the common theme here is recruitment and retention. How about this, folks? Lack of leadership, lack of vision, lack of professionalism, lazy department heads, malfeasance of public funds. Until you change those areas, it doesn't matter how much you tax the people. Nothing is ever going to change, and Del Norte County will never prosper. No reduction in department head wages were ever done during this time. And instead, you know, you guys give yourself a 3 to 12% increase. And you can't live on $150,000 a year. What is wrong with that picture? And finally, it's nice to know Mr. Jones flipped the script. So we know not to vote for you November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. Kylie, have you got anything else?
Chair, I do not have any more online.
All right. Thank you.
Chair Hamilton?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify that the Board of Supervisors have not received any kind of wage adjustments or increases during this time period. And also Measure R funding was not used for any administrative salaries. I encourage anybody who has questions about this. This is kind of a brief overview of my reports today. So I encourage you to go on to the agenda item and actually read the reports and schedule anytime that you have to come talk with me if you have questions about Measure R.
Yeah, we seem to keep saying that at every meeting. You know, we didn't receive any raises. The administration never received any raises, but anyway, Lonnie. Yeah.
Morning. I always debate whether I'm actually going to say anything. CAO covered most of the information that you received from me, but to directly address Miss Sutter, you know, she can call me lazy all she wants, and that's fine. She's entitled to her opinion. But when it comes to accusing me of fiscal malfeasance, I will stand up here and I will say she is absolutely wrong. Absolutely categorically. There is no fiscal malfeasance in my department. There is no fiscal malfeasance in the sheriff's office. It's been very, very clearly laid out how this funding is being handled, how it's being accounted for. And if she'd like to produce something, then there's a venue for that, because we're not just talking about people's opinions at that point. We're talking about a whole nother level of accountability that's required. We're talking about the arena I operate in. We're talking about going to court. We're talking about criminal charges. And I take offense at that at the highest level, both on my part as a department head, but more importantly on my staff's part. They don't deserve to be thrown under that bus. And although that may not be her intent, when she's calling out department heads and mishandling of funding, that's the impact that it has. And no officer in this community or this county deserves that.
Thank you, Lonnie. Any further public comment?
Chair, I have another hand raised online.
Okay.
Brandon, you're on. Brandon?
Yes, thank you, Chairman and Board of Supervisors. You know, it's difficult because we want people to be employed. We want people to earn a good wage. We want people to be successful in our community. But the government and this board seems complacent in limiting capitalism and free enterprise and restricting business while government continues to expand. Working families do not need government to tell them how to live and how to be healthy. Realize your role in the community and display some fiscal responsibility. What do we get for all our tax dollars? Already, we don't get our roads done. We spend more money studying things than actually accomplishing things. We go to lots of meetings, but what does it produce? Our elections are skeptical. Our road department has to put a survey out to know what's wrong with our roads. I mean, they're professionals. Let them do their job. Why are we wasting money on a survey? You don't know the roads that need to be fixed? Why is 199 not being upgraded? Why is Last Chance not being done? Look at all the salaries that we're paying to study these things. I think that government needs to take a step back, show some responsibility. I think we should repeal Measure R and live within our means. You're continuing to exacerbate the inflation issue, and it's not a good scenario. It's likely to lead to an economic recession. It should have been put on the preliminary election. A lot of people worked hard to get it on, and it's disappointing that this board thwarted those efforts. Let the people decide. Of course, we want to employ good jobs, but attract businesses, reduce taxes, incentivize business to come here. One thing we can all agree on is that Del Norte County has an immense amount of untapped potential.
Thank you.
Do your jobs, utilize.
Thank you. Anybody else, Kylie?
I have nobody else.
Okay. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I just appreciate that. I think the last speaker, asked the question why. And I think that's what everybody asks in a situation like this. Well, why did the county, why did a majority of people vote for Measure R? And why did it pass? How are the funds allocated? Why? And a lot of us have been here a long time and have attempted to respond to the whys, the question, why are we doing things the way we are? And they're critical oftentimes of these efforts that we make as a board, as a community, in directions and trying to address regulations that I think we oftentimes feel in rural California, especially in Del Norte County, restrict a lot of what this last speaker raised as issues. But more importantly, when we begin to answer those questions, or at least try to explain them and educate our constituents, it comes with a process. And I guess that's a question I have for us today, the why piece of this. There's a large percentage of our constituents here in Del Norte County that didn't vote for Measure R on its first go around. And our ability to communicate the whys, the things that we as board members heard from our constituents over a period of time. We're not getting the sheriff to respond to portions of our rural community. We can't get the agricultural commissioner out here to address issues with dogs. We can't clean up this area. Well, why can't you? Well, after hearing 25 years of why can't you, this board took a proactive measure to fill the hole in our general fund through Measure R to address these areas specifically around roads, blight, animal control, development with community development department, areas specifically to address this. And now it's getting asked to be addressed again, the why piece. So I compliment Mr. Jones in coming forward today, a man admittedly who had voted against Measure R, but chose to answer his question, why? And now through educational processes has learned that not only is their process transparent, but the funds have gone directly where they were intended to go. In turning us around that 180 degrees to proactively, as a county, as a community, address these areas. So when our constituents need help, the county's there to provide those. So we're trying to address your whys. We are doing this after, at least for me, 25 plus years here, trying to address those whys. So I just want to make sure that we as board members, we as staff are doing our best to help communicate with Del Norte County. So when November rolls around, the right decision is made through that process of education. But I just really wanted to say, Neil, I really appreciate staff's efforts to put this information forward to show really what the consequences of this repeal might mean.
Yeah, and I'd like to say the same thing, Neil. Nice job. Very thorough. Appreciate that. And with that, I think we'll move on to item number 20. Accept the attached certification of the results of the petition to repeal Measure R and place it on the ballot as requested by the Del Norte County Register of voters.
Move to approve.
Have a motion
I will second it, but I do have a question.
and I have a second.
I have a question as well.
Okay. Supervisor Starkey?
My question is that it'll be on the ballot, but who determines the language? What's the language of that actual, the wording?
Of the question the voters will look at?
Yeah, because with the repeal and all the information that we got, it's wording number one, and there's a lot of inaccuracies in it. So I want to make sure who determines the language.
So this is an important thing to talk about. The voters will vote on specifically what was presented in the initiative, whether it makes sense, whether it's clear, whether it's confusing, whether it's accurate. They will vote on this. Something that I think everybody should be thinking about. One of my statutory duties is an impartial analysis that normally wouldn't really get seen until those sample ballots go out. And so I haven't written it yet, but I'll tell you what it's going to say, and that's that voting for this initiative won't have any legal effect. It repeals a resolution by the Board of Supervisors that placed the tax on the ballot. It does not repeal the tax the voters approved. It is just not correctly drafted to do what it says it's going to do. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to say it now is I didn't want to get, down past November and half the county voted one way or the other and then finds out or thinks we hit the ball. And there is still time, I think, to go get new signatures for a proper repeal. But this specifically says Measure R, which was enacted by Resolution 2020-036 on July 28th, 2020, is repealed, and it has strike through of that resolution. That resolution isn't the tax. That resolution is a resolution of the board putting it on the ballot. You can repeal that all day long. It already happened. It's done. The tax is an ordinance. It's a fully drafted ordinance. It was approved by the Department of Tax Fee Administration. And to repeal that, you have to actually repeal it. I mean, an initiative is a law. It's an ordinance. It's interpreted by the same rules as any other ordinance. And this is a vague expression of an intent to not have a tax. It's not a repeal of the specific ordinance.
Thank you, Joe. Supervisor Short, you had something?
I just was asking about the date on the agenda item. Says that it's been found to be sufficient to be placed on the June 7th primary election ballot. I just wanted to double check to make sure that was correct.
Yeah, I mean, that's just because it had been at the last board meeting, but because of the request for the report, it just pushes the date. So it had been found adequate, but the election that it will go on, because it has to be, the next election more than I think 83 days from now, it just by necessity will be November.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Maston, did you have something?
Yeah, it was just, in order for them to get the required signatures to properly repeal Measure R, are they going to be able to do that? Because absentee ballots go out on May 9th. Are they going to be able to do that in time for the June 7th ballot?
It's not going on.
They won't.
It's not going on June 7th.
It'll be
Okay,
November.
so it's November.
And then I have a follow-up to that is, so if they do need to correct it and they decide to do that, we go through this process all again, correct?
Yeah, at this point, the board has no choice but to put this on the ballot. So if they did it again, there would be 2 repeals on the ballot. It's just kind of the way it goes.
Okay, any public comment?
Chair, I'm not seeing any online at this time.
Okay. With that, if there's no more discussion, Kylie, would you please poll the vote?
I just had a hand raise. Are you wanting to take the public comment or?
Not wanting to, but let's go ahead.
Linda, you are on.
Thank you. Thank you for this valuable information. I'm sure that we will have to file another repeal. I'd like to say that for number 1. Number 2, if Mr. Raymond is still in the audience, I just like to say the probation office is one of the worst offenders towards public, discourteous and rude. Can't even talk to him, can't make an appointment with him, and he thinks he's doing a great job. No, you're not. Thank you.
Thank you. Kylie, would you please poll the vote?
Supervisor Short,
Yes.
Supervisor Maston,
Yes.
Supervisor Starkey,
Yes.
Supervisor Howard,
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson.
Yes. Okay, moving on to budget transfers. We have budget transfer 04-01, $1,257,971 within the Department of Health and Human Services to start a new budget housing, a new housing budget unit. For motion,
Move to approve.
I'll second.
have a motion and a second. Any public comment? Seeing no public comment, Kylie?
Supervisor Maston,
Yes.
Supervisor Short,
Yes.
Supervisor Starkey,
Yes.
Supervisor Howard,
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson.
Yes. Okay, on to legislative and budget issues. We have one item number 22, approve the use of $6,500 of Measure R funds for improvements to the fireside room in the Veterans Memorial Building as requested by Veteran Services Officer. Looking for a motion?
Just wanted to double check that this is a permitted use of Measure R funds.
That was also my question.
Yes. Yes, it is. Not only are services to our veterans vital in this community, it's also under Measure R, it's general services, which this would fall under as well.
Beautiful. With that, I would move to approve.
I'll second that motion.
Have a motion and second. Any public comment?
Chair, I'm not seeing any.
Seeing no public comment, then Kylie, would you please poll the vote?
Supervisor Starkey,
Yes.
Supervisor Maston,
Yes.
Supervisor Howard,
Yes.
Supervisor Short,
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson.
Yes. Have we hit everything?
We voted to
Oh,
add
that's
the
right.
referee item on the agenda, but we haven't taken a formal vote on it.
Okay. Neil, I don't know if you need to speak to it again, but maybe just give us the high points of what we're changing the payment to the referees from and to.
Yeah, our current rate for our referees per game is $25. Locally, it's $30 from our other referee competitors as far as the school district is concerned. The refereeing through the high school is much higher than that. We've had a horrible time finding referees for our leagues. Currently, we have three inexperienced referees trying to referee our adult basketball leagues, and it hasn't been very successful. So in order to address some of that, we're asking for an increase in the per game compensation, which is $30 per game, which is competitive locally. We already have additional interest from 2 or 3 individuals who are willing to step forward at that rate because they also ref locally in other areas like the 7th and 8th grade basketball games where they are paid $30 per game. So it's just an approach to try to address the need for referees for our programs that we're running through recreation.
Okay. Motion.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any public comment?
Chair, I'm not seeing any online.
Seeing no public comment, Kylie, would you please poll the vote?
Supervisor Maston,
Yes.
Supervisor Howard,
Yes.
Supervisor Starkey,
Yes.
Supervisor Short,
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson.
Yes.
There's the chair. There's one other thing I'd like to mention about that. Our attempt of having the additional wages for the referees is to get experienced referees there, but also for mentoring our younger referees. I mentioned the younger referees not having experience and having issues right now. This is not to eliminate the younger referees. It's to create a junior referee and a senior referee structure so they're mentored during the program.
Great. Thank you. Kylie, we good?
That's it.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Next meeting is April 26th. See you then.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be part of